What happens when a mother starts noticing her son's best friend in a way she shouldn't? The tension builds, the lines blur. But how far will it go? And when betrayal and desire collide, who will cross the line first? Don't miss this gripping story. Like and subscribe for more. The weekend began like any other. My son, Caleb, had invited his best friend, Jamal, to stay for a few days, which wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Jamal had spent countless weekends at our place over the years. The two had been inseparable since middle school, and I had always considered Jamal a part of the family. I was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner when they arrived. I could hear their laughter before the door even opened. Caleb's hearty laugh mixing with Jamal's lighter, carefree one. "Hey, Mom," Caleb called out as he dropped his duffel bag by the door. "Hi, Mrs. Dawson," Jamal said, his voice warm and familiar. "Hi, boys," I greeted them with a smile. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Go ahead and put your things away." Jamal nodded politely before following Caleb upstairs. As they disappeared from view, I couldn't help but think about how much Jamal had changed over the years. He was no longer the skinny kid who used to raid our fridge and stay up all night playing video games. He had grown taller, with broad shoulders and a confident way of carrying himself. Shaking off the thought, I focused back on my chopping. By the time the boys came downstairs, dinner was ready. We sat down together, enjoying our meal while chatting about everything, from Caleb's latest soccer game to Jamal's college plans. After dinner, the boys headed down to the basement to Caleb's gaming setup. I cleaned up the kitchen, the sound of their banter drifting up the stairs, providing a comforting background noise. It felt reassuring, the familiarity of it all. The next morning, Caleb left early for soccer practice, leaving Jamal alone in the house. He came downstairs as I was making coffee, his hair a bit messy, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Good morning," I replied, handing him a mug. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip and leaning against the counter. We chatted for a while, the conversation flowing easily. He shared details about his classes, his plans to study engineering, and the part-time job he had taken at a local hardware store. I listened, genuinely interested and surprised by how mature he sounded. As the day went on, I found myself noticing little things. How his smile brightened his face, how polite he was, and how he carried himself with quiet confidence. It was innocent, I told myself, just observations, but there was a warmth to his presence that I couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, when Caleb came back home, everything returned to normal. We spent the evening playing board games and watching movies, with the house filled with laughter and the smell of popcorn. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the thought of how Jamal had looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It was subtle, a flicker in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. I shook my head, scolding myself for reading too much into it. He was just a kid, a friend of my son's. Nothing more. Still, as I drifted off to sleep, the memory of his gaze lingered, a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. The next day began like any other lazy Saturday. Caleb had another early soccer practice, leaving Jamal and me alone in the house again. I had planned to spend the morning tidying up, but when I came downstairs, I found Jamal already busy in the living room, vacuuming and straightening up. "Morning," I said, a little surprised. "Morning, Mrs. Dawson," he replied, pausing to turn off the vacuum. "I thought I'd help out a bit. Caleb told me you've been juggling a lot lately with work and everything." I smiled, touched by the gesture. "That's sweet of you, Jamal. Thank you." He shrugged, his usual easygoing smile lighting up his face. "It's the least I could do. You've always been so kind to me." I moved on to folding laundry while he continued cleaning, but I couldn't help noticing how thorough he was. Dusting the shelves, fluffing the pillows, even wiping down the coffee table. By the time he was done, the living room looked better than it had in weeks. "You didn't have to do all that," I said as he joined me in the kitchen. "I wanted to," he replied, leaning against the counter. "You deserve a break." There was something in the way he said it, gentle, almost reverent, that made my heart skip a beat. I quickly turned away, focusing on folding a towel to distract myself. "Do you want some breakfast?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Sure," he said, pulling up a stool at the counter. As I cooked, we talked about everything and nothing: his future plans, his favorite movies, and even his memories of coming to our house and feeling like it was his second home. "You were always so welcoming," he said, his voice soft. "I don't think I ever thanked you for that." I glanced at him, caught off guard by the sincerity in his eyes. "You don't have to thank me, Jamal. Your family." He held my gaze for a moment longer than felt comfortable, and I quickly looked away, focusing on flipping the pancakes. After breakfast, I suggested we spend some time outside. It was a beautiful day, the kind that begged to be enjoyed. We ended up in the backyard where sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the lawn. Jamal offered to help with some gardening, and I gladly accepted. We worked side by side, pulling weeds and planting flowers. At one point, I stood up to stretch and caught him looking at me. His expression was unreadable. "What?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Nothing," he said quickly, his cheeks reddening. You look happy out here." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. There was something in his tone, a quiet intensity, that made my stomach flutter. I forced a smile, brushing dirt off my hands. "Well, it's hard not to be happy on a day like this." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me for a little longer before he turned back to the flower bed. As the afternoon wore on, the tension between us became harder to ignore. It was in the way he stood a little too close, the way his laughter seemed softer, more personal when we shared a joke. At one point, I tripped over a loose stone in the garden path, and Jamal caught me before I might fall. His hands were steady on my arms, holding me in place, and for a brief moment, we just stood there, too close, the air between us humming with unsaid words. "You all right?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Yeah," I responded, pulling away quickly. "Thanks." The rest of the day blurred by. Caleb came home in the late afternoon, his lively energy filling the house and breaking the tension. But even as we sat down to dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about the feel of Jamal's hands on my arms, the way his touch lingered for just a second too long. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of what had happened, or nearly happened, settled over me. I told myself it was nothing, just a brief moment of confusion, but deep inside, I knew it was more than that. There was an undeniable and dangerous connection between us, and no matter how hard I tried to push it aside, I couldn't stop wondering what could have happened if Caleb hadn't come home when he did. The next morning, I woke up determined to leave the strange feelings from the previous day behind me. Jamal was just a boy I'd known since childhood, nothing more. I resolved to keep my distance and let the weekend pass without giving those fleeting moments any more weight than they deserved. But, as it often happens, life had other plans. Caleb was out of town for a tournament, and my husband had been unexpectedly called into work, leaving just Jamal and me alone in the house. I had intended to catch up on errands, but a sudden downpour darkened the sky and kept us both indoors. "Looks like we're stuck here," Jamal said, standing by the living room window as rain ran down the glass. "Yeah," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Good day to just relax, I guess." I kept myself busy in the kitchen, trying to ignore the growing awareness of his presence. The house felt smaller, the silence between us more intense. By early afternoon, the rain had softened into a light drizzle, and I decided to clean out the attic, a task I'd been putting off for months. Jamal offered to help, and though I hesitated, I finally agreed. The attic was cramped and musty, filled with boxes of old memories, photos, trinkets, and forgotten treasures from another life. We worked silently at first, sorting through the clutter. "Is this you?" Jamal asked, holding up a worn photo of me from college. I looked at it and laughed. "Yeah, that was a long time ago." "You look beautiful," he said, his voice gentle. I looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. His gaze was steady, almost reverent, and for a moment I couldn't look away. "Thank you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We kept working, but the atmosphere between us had changed. Every brush of his arm against mine, every shared glance felt electric. At one point, we both reached for the same box and our hands touched. I pulled back, but Jamal held on. Mrs. Dawson, he said, his voice low, almost pleading. Jamal, don't, I began, but the words stuck in my throat. He stepped closer, still holding my hand. His dark eyes searched mine, filled with a mix of longing and hesitation. I know this is wrong, he said, barely audible, but I can't stop thinking about you. My heart raced, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. I wanted to pull away, to stop whatever this was, but his words, his gaze, they kept me rooted in place. Jamal, we can't, I whispered, trembling. This isn't right. I know, he said, letting go of my hand. I'm sorry, I needed you to know. The moment lingered, heavy and unspoken, and then, as if an invisible line had been crossed, he stepped back. I should go, he said, his voice tight. I nodded, unable to speak. He turned and left the attic, leaving me standing there, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. When I finally made my way downstairs, the house was silent. Jamal was gone, and with him, the tension that had been building all weekend. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of what had almost occurred settled in. I knew I had to set boundaries, to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. But even as I resolved to move forward, I couldn't shake the memory of his words and the way he had looked at me, filled with frustration. An itch beneath my skin, an unrelenting restlessness that no amount of deep breaths or forced smiles could ease. My husband, Jeffrey, had cheated. Not just once, not just a slip-up, but a full-blown affair with a woman from his office. And I, like a fool, stayed. Not for him, never for him, but for our children, for the life I had spent years building. That's what everyone told me I should do. The women at the PTA meetings, my mother, even my best friend. They all acted like staying would be less damaging than leaving. Like I should be grateful he stayed. Like I should feel relief that the affair had ended. As though just knowing it had happened wasn't enough to shatter everything inside me. I tried to forgive him. At least I tried to play the part. We went to therapy. He cried. He begged. He swore it was a mistake. And maybe it was, but I wasn't blind. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment. He had built something with her. A secret world I wasn't part of. Hotel rooms, late-night messages, stolen moments at work. He gave her his time, his affection, the parts of him I hadn't seen in years. And yet, I was expected to patch things up, to smile, to pretend like I didn't lie awake at night, wondering if he was still thinking about her. The worst part? It wasn't just the betrayal. It was how I had let myself shrink in our marriage, how I had poured everything into our family, into being a good wife, a good mother, and disappeared in the process. Somewhere along the way, I had become dull, predictable, convenient. I hated him for what he did, but I hated myself more for letting it happen. That's when I started going to the gym. Not for revenge, not at first. It wasn't some calculated plan to make Jeffrey regret his actions, to transform into the kind of woman who would make him feel sorry. I just needed something. Something that was mine. Something to make me feel alive again. It started small. A few treadmill runs, some light weightlifting. I wasn't trying to become someone else, just trying to find myself again. And for a while, it was just a routine. An hour to myself. A place where I wasn't a wife or a mother, where no one needed me. Then I met Aiden. It was one morning when I was particularly exhausted, my body aching from pushing myself too hard the day before. I was staring at the weights, trying to psych myself up, when I heard a voice behind me. Need a spot? I turned to see him. Tall, lean but strong. The kind of physique that comes from years of dedication. His eyes were sharp, but there was a softness to them, a patience. He wasn't one of those trainers who barked orders and made you feel incompetent. There was something easy about the way he carried himself, like he knew how to make someone feel comfortable in their own skin. I think I'm just trying to decide if I have the energy for this today. I chuckled softly and admitted it, and he smiled. That's half the battle, he said. After a brief pause, he added, I'm Aiden, by the way. I told him my name, expecting the conversation to end right there, but it didn't. He asked me about my fitness goals and what I was hoping to achieve. He wanted to know if I was training for anything in particular. I should have given the typical answer about wanting to be healthier and stronger, but instead the words escaped me before I could stop them. I just want to feel like myself again. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made me feel exposed, like he could see right through me. But instead of pressing further, he nodded and said, "That's a good reason to be here." That marked the start of it. At first, it was casual. He gave me pointers, helped adjust my form, and encouraged me to push myself more. I appreciated his presence, the way he made me feel like I belonged in that space. But as time passed, things started to change. It was no longer just about the workouts. It became about him. Aiden started to feel safe. He wasn't like Jeffrey. He listened. He paid attention when I spoke, actually hearing me instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. I was starving for that kind of attention, the kind that made me feel noticed. Then there were the moments, the small, almost imperceptible moments that began to accumulate. The way he lingered just a little too long when spotting me, how he placed his hand lightly but deliberately on my back to guide me to a machine, or the way his eyes would quickly flicker over me when he thought I wasn't looking. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into things because I wanted to feel desired again. But deep down, I knew it wasn't all in my head. One evening, after a particularly tough workout, it became undeniable. I had pushed myself hard, sweat soaking my back and my muscles trembling with fatigue. When I finished, I sat on a bench, catching my breath. Aiden crouched in front of me, a teasing smirk tugging at his lips. "You're going to feel that tomorrow," he said. I laughed weakly, replying, "I already feel it now." His eyes met mine, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between us. Neither of us moved, but I felt it. The pull, the static in the air. I should have looked away, should have said something to break the silence, but I didn't. Neither did he. I left the gym that night with my heart still racing, but it had nothing to do with the workout. On the drive home, I replayed the moment in my mind. The way Aiden had crouched in front of me, his face so close that I could see the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead, the intensity in his dark eyes. Neither of us had moved, as if we were both waiting to see who would break first. It had been nothing, and yet it had been everything. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Jeffrey was in the living room, his feet propped up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even glance up as I entered. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him, wondering if he had ever felt that way about me. If there had ever been a time in the past few years when his heart had raced just from being near me. I already knew the answer. Taking a slow breath, I pushed those thoughts aside and walked past him toward the kitchen. "Dinner's in the fridge," he said flatly, still staring at his screen. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it was. How effortlessly he acted like we were nothing more than roommates passing through the same space. He had no idea what was going on inside me. He had no clue that I had just been inches away from another man, fighting the urge to close the gap between us. No idea how much I wanted to. The next time I saw Aiden, the atmosphere between us had shifted. At first, it was subtle. How his hand lingered just a bit longer when adjusting my form. How he would watch me when he thought I wasn't looking. How our conversations slowly stretched into areas that had nothing to do with fitness. Then, one evening, the change became impossible to ignore. I had stayed late, pushing through an extra set after most people had already left. Aiden had been with another client earlier, but now it was just the two of us. The gym was quieter, the fluorescent lights casting a soft glow over the empty space. I had been doing squats, and by the time I was on my last rep, my legs were shaking. I struggled to push through the final movement when Aiden stepped behind me. Close. Too close. "Come on," he murmured, his voice low, his hands hovering just near my waist but not quite touching. "You've got this." I gritted my teeth, pushing through the burn until I finally straightened. But as soon as I did, my balance faltered and Aiden's hands shot out, steadying me. His grip was firm, his fingers pressing into my sides just above my hips. I should have stepped away, should have thanked him and created some distance, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, my back barely an inch from his chest, his hands still holding me in place. I could feel the heat of his skin through my shirt, the rise and fall of his breath. For a brief moment, just a second, I closed my eyes. It would have been so easy. All I had to do was lean back slightly, and I would feel him against me. I would know what it was like to be desired again. But just as quickly, I pulled away. Aiden's hands dropped, but he didn't move. I turned to face him, my heart pounding in my ears. Neither of us said anything. I studied his face, searching for a sign that I had imagined everything, that I was projecting my own desires onto him. But it was there, clear as day. The way his gaze flickered to my lips, the way his jaw tightened like he was fighting something just as hard as I was. He wanted me too. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. I should go. Aiden nodded, but he didn't look away. Yeah, he said. Probably. But neither of us moved. The pull between us was like gravity, silent but undeniable. For a moment, I thought, this is it. This is where the line breaks, where we cross into something neither of us can undo. Then my phone buzzed. I jumped, stepping back as if I had been caught. My hands fumbled for my bag as I opened it and pulled out my phone. Jeffrey's name flashed on the screen, and just like that, the moment shattered. I let out a deep breath, shook my head, and turned away. "Good night, Aiden," I whispered softly, not looking back as I exited, but I could still feel his gaze on me. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning, every nerve alive with the memory of what had almost happened. What could have happened? Every time I shut my eyes, I could still feel Aiden's hands on me, steadying me, lingering, sparking something deep within me that I hadn't felt in years. My body reacted to the thought of his breath on my skin, the unspoken tension between us. But then Jeffrey's name popped up on my phone, a harsh, cold reminder of my reality. I turned onto my side, gripping the sheets. I had wanted to feel wanted, to be seen. But now I realized how dangerous this was. I had to stop. I lasted 3 days trying to convince myself that I had misread Aiden, that I was only projecting my own loneliness onto him. Then on the 4th day, it all came crashing down. It began the moment I entered the gym. Aiden was already there, stretching by the weight rack. He looked up when he saw me, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Something dark. Something knowing. Before I could even set my bag down, he spoke, his voice firm. "Come with me." It wasn't a question. I hesitated, glancing around, but the gym was busy, with everyone too immersed in their own workouts to notice us. Still, I shouldn't have followed him, but I did. He led me to the back of the gym, past the cardio machines and rows of weights, into a small, dimly lit storage room. As soon as the door shut behind us, the air changed. It was just the two of us now. No distractions, no excuses. I swallowed, pressing my back against the door. Aiden's name barely escaped my lips before he closed the distance between us, one hand resting against the wall near my head, the other hovering near my waist. He wasn't touching me, not yet, but I could feel the heat radiating from him, the pull of something we'd both been trying so hard to resist. He leaned in, his voice low. "Tell me to stop." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He exhaled slowly, his eyes flickering between mine and my lips. "You can't, can you?" he asked. I shuddered. I should have pushed him away, should have walked out and never looked back. But I didn't move. I didn't want to. The air between us was thick, electric, charged with the weight of unspoken desire. His fingers brushed my hip, the lightest touch, barely there, but it sent a shiver down my spine. My resolve started to slip. Then my phone rang. The sound shattered the moment, slicing through the tension like a knife. I let out a shaky breath, fumbling for my bag, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone, expecting to see Jeffrey's name. But it wasn't him. It was an unknown number. My stomach twisted. Aiden stepped back, running a hand through his hair. The moment was gone, but the tension still crackled in the air. I hesitated, then answered, "Hello?" Silence. Then a woman's voice, unfamiliar, professional. "Mrs. Wells?" She paused. "This is Officer Bradley from the Eastwood Police Department. I'm calling regarding your husband, Jeffrey Wells." My blood ran cold. I felt Aiden stiffen beside me, his eyes narrowing. "What about him?" I whispered. The officer took a breath. "I'm afraid there's been an accident." The drive to the hospital was a blur. I barely noticed Aiden helping me into the car. Barely heard him telling me to breathe and that everything would be fine. But how could it be? My hands shook so much I could barely hold my phone. My mind raced with questions. An accident? What kind? How bad? Was he... I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. When we arrived, I barely noticed Aiden parking the car. My feet were already moving before I even realized I was out of the car. The hospital was bright, sterile, and the scent of antiseptic burned my nose. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Jeffrey Wells," I said, breathless at the front desk. The nurse gave me a sympathetic look. "He's in the ICU. Follow me." My legs felt numb as I walked behind her. Aiden stayed with me, silent but steady. Finally, we reached the room. The sight of Jeffrey stopped me in my tracks. He was lying in the hospital bed, hooked to machines, his face bruised and swollen, but he was alive. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The doctor stepped forward. "He suffered a severe concussion and some broken ribs, but he's stable for now," he said. "He's very lucky." I nodded numbly, my eyes still fixed on Jeffrey. Then, as though sensing me, he stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. I stepped closer. "Jeffrey?" I whispered. His gaze slowly found mine, and then he started laughing. A weak, raspy chuckle that sent a chill down my spine. "Jeffrey?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes sharpened, and when he spoke, his words froze me in place. "You think I didn't know?" My breath caught. He knew. He knew about Aiden. He knew everything. Then, still grinning, he whispered, "This isn't over." My stomach twisted, my mind spinning. I felt Aiden step closer behind me, his presence warm, steady, but my body was cold. Jeffrey's eyes burned into mine. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He was playing me. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't been the one in control. Not by a long shot.